Hey, what's up everybody? Todd Shellnut here with CFI Pro, and today we're going to have our next installment, long awaited. A lot of you definitely sent messages, a ton of messages over the past month or two, wanted to know when is the next part of the regulations coming out. Well, today is the day, and the next part of the regulations is now out. So I'm going to break this down into different parts because when you get to this part of the regs, the first 3 video series that you saw was just basically to bring your awareness up. But this is usually the hardest part for people to have to deal with. So we're going to start off specifically talking about just today, just 6181 through 6189. And the reason for it is because this is incredibly complex for the first timer, but I'm going to try to make it as easy as possible. So let's start and see what we have in store for us. So the first thing is, why do I need to know this information? And the reason why is because if you're going to be taking an exam for the initial flight instructor, or basically for any flight instructor certificate, you're going to have to go towards the PTS. So of course, this is our PTS that we have on the left-hand side of the screen, and this is for our CFI initial rating. It doesn't matter whether you're doing single engine initial or multi-engine initial, they're pretty much remotely the same. And if I go to Area of Operation 2, Technical Subject Areas, it says that the examiner must select at least task Bravo, Mike, and at least one other task. So if we look down at Bravo, we can see its runway incursions. And if we scroll down to Mike, which is starts on the bottom of this page, let's see here. I think I missed it. Here we go. So it starts on the bottom of this page, Task M, logbook entries and certificate endorsements. And it says that the applicant must exhibit instructional knowledge of the elements related to logbook entries and certificate endorsements by describing the required logbook entries for instruction given. So we're going to talk about these 1 through 5 while I'm going over this information. But it doesn't stop there. So there's a lot of information that is contained within this that is beyond task Mike. So the examiner can actually, when going over this information, can actually ask you information from 2 different areas. So the first one is Area of Operation 2, task Mike. The second one would be Area of Operation 3, Task A, and it says that you have to know the training requirements for the issuance of a recreational, private, or commercial, and the privileges and limitations of a pilot certificate, class and duration of medicals, recent pilot flight experience, and required entries in pilot logbook or flight record. So this information here can also come out of this part as well for the FARs. So without further ado, let's go back up to Mike. We'll have that there, and let's just go ahead and start. Now, we really won't actually bring this stuff in the PTS until actually we finish talking about this, so be patient. I promise over the next 2 videos, you'll definitely see a little bit more clarification as to what you need to know. So first off, we start off with Subpart C, Student Pilots, and we're going to go to 6181, just talks about applicability, nothing you need to memorize. 6183 talks about eligibility requirements for student pilots. So you want to be a student pilot, and what are the eligibility requirements? Well, the first one is that if you're going to be in an airplane, because all these video series are specifically for airplanes, then you have to be at least 16 years of age to get that certificate. Now, there is an exception. Like, for instance, what if you wanted to solo on your 16th birthday? Could you possibly do that? And the answer is yes. The IACRA system, which is used for the submittal of the student pilot application, will actually take a student pilot application based off the birth date of the photo ID that the submitter, which is usually a CFI, DPE, or an aviation safety inspector. Once they put in your ID information, you can submit this application up to 90 days prior to the actual 16th birthday. So you actually can still solo on your birthday. IACRA will take that application up to 90 days prior of the birth date put in by the submitter. It also says, of course, we're not going to go over Bravo because that's a glider or a balloon. So Charlie says must be able to read, speak, write, and understand the English language. And if you absolutely positively are unsure, it's no problem. Just simply contact your local FSDO, that's your Flight Standards District Office, and they can help you with that. They have people who are trained to be able to let you know if they speak the current level required by the ICAO, which is International Civil Aviation Organization. And I think it's right now currently a level 3 or 4. I'd have to look that up. Not something that you need to know, because you actually cannot, unless you've been trained, you can't actually know if someone's a 3 or a 4. So just let the FAA handle it. You're going to take all the weight off of you. The next here is 6185, which is application. So it says an applicant for a student pilot certificate must make that application in a form acceptable to the administrator. So who is the administrator? Well, that's the FAA, the FAA, okay? And so what is the acceptable form that we give to the administrator? Well, currently right now it's IACRA, because IACRA has to siphon that application through TSA before it actually gets to the administrator. So the current application way that we do right now is through IACRA. If you do it through a Flight Standards District Office, they may have another way of doing it, like paper, but I highly doubt it. If you're also part of a 141 flight school, there's many people that can approve an application for a student pilot certificate, to include an operations inspector from a FAA, a designated pilot examiner, a airman certification representative associated with a flight school, with a pilot school. That's going to be the 141 person, or a flight instructor. So flight instructors can actually do the submittal of a student pilot certificate. Okay. And so here's going to be the big one, 6187. Wow, just very poorly written by the FAA. It's not something that you want to take on by yourself unless you know about it, because it's well out of order. It does not happen in a sense in which someone can actually read 1 and read 2, or read A, read B, read C, and it just makes sense. It doesn't work that way. This thing's stretched out amongst many different regs. But let's go ahead through 6187 and let's go ahead and start talking about that. Now, eventually you're going to see me come back and tie all this stuff together, but today I simply just have to go over the reg as like an icebreaker, just to explain to you what this means. So 6187 is specifically the solo requirements for student pilots. And in paragraph A, it says that a student pilot may not operate an aircraft in solo flight unless that student has met the requirements of this section. And the term solo flight means that the person is the only person in the airplane, that the student is the only person in the airplane. There's sole occupant of the aircraft during which the time that they're performing the duties. So that's all in A. It's just basically the requirements of a solo flight. Now B, with anything that we do in aviation, whether it be a solo, whether it be a private pilot certification, commercial pilot certification, recreational, sport, we all must have aeronautical knowledge, and that's book work, and we also must have some form of flight knowledge, and that's your experience or the flight training aspect of things. So we have the aeronautical knowledge, which is the book work, and then the flight training, which is what we actually do in the airplane. So looking at B here, it says that a student pilot must demonstrate satisfactory aeronautical knowledge on a knowledge test that meets requirements of this paragraph. So if you want to make a note on Bravo here, Bravo is nothing more than just the pre-solo written test. So when you have a student walk into your flight school, the very first thing you want to start going over with them when you're doing ground school is the rules applicable to Part 61 and 91. And they also want to talk about the airspace rules and procedures only for the airport in which the solo flight will be performed. So if they're not soloing in Bravo, Charlie, or Delta, and they're only soloing at an airport where that has a Class Golf floor and a Class Echo area above 700, then you only need to discuss with them Class Golf and Class Echo, and that's actually per the regs. So the test is usually not that bad if you just talk about Class Golf and Class Echo airspace on the test, which is only things required by the regs. Letter III is the flight characteristics and operational limitations of the make and model of the aircraft to be flown. So whatever make and model aircraft that you're flying, you probably want to talk to them about the operational limitations, such as performance data, weight and balance, maybe some stuff about the systems and some emergency operations, but definitely not limited to what I'm saying. You as the instructor can make the test You can design this test yourself, and you can put anything that you want to put in it as long as you think that that is what it takes to satisfactorily know that the person has the aeronautical knowledge to solo. Because if the person was to ball up the airplane on that flight, then the FAA is going to want to know that you did your job. Now, after you give them this knowledge test, you're going to have to, of course, administer the test. And at the conclusion, you've got to review all the incorrect answers with the student and correct it to 100%. Although it doesn't say to keep this on file, I'm telling you right now that if you don't keep this test until that person graduates private pilot, you're doing yourself a great injustice. Do not get rid of this test. Keep this test, because they're going to want to know, who is they? The FAA. They're going to want to know, did you actually do this test? Without having it on file, you simply just would not know. So the next one we have here is letter C, and it says pre-solo flight training. So just like we had the aeronautical knowledge, which is the ground, we also have the flight training. Now, C is just a statement saying that you've actually done the training. So we're actually going to look at some training here in a minute. And then after we do the training, we're going to go back up to C to attest to the fact that we've actually done the training. So Charlie says the pre-solo flight training is prior to conducting a solo flight. A student pilot must have 1. Received and logged flight training for the maneuvers and procedures of the section that are appropriate to the make and model of aircraft to be flown, and demonstrated satisfactory proficiency and safety as judged by an authorized instructor on the maneuvers and procedures required by the section of the make and model of aircraft or similar make and model of aircraft to be flown. And that means that if somebody was soloing in a Warrior and then right before it you did a flight or two in an Archer, is that a similar make and model? Sure it is. Well, they're both PA-28s. It's just one's a 28-140 or 160 and the other one's a 180. So it's remotely the same airplane. It's very similar make and model as composed to like an Archer versus a Cessna. That is not similar make and model. So we'll come back to Charlie in just a minute, because remember, with Charlie we're attesting as an instructor that we have actually done something, and this is very important. So we'll come back to Charlie. Now, for those of you who are training your applicants for single engine, Delta is very important to you. So Delta is all the maneuvers and procedures for pre-solo flight training. So if you are a brand new instructor and you're like, wow, what do I do with my student? No problem. You just go to 6187 Delta, and this is all the things that you would have to do with a person prior to soloing them. Let's actually get that where you can see. Ooh, my goodness, what did I just do here? Okay. Yeah, let's actually get this where you can see the whole entire list. Here we go. So this is maneuvers and procedures for pre-solo flight training in a single engine airplane. And it says here that you have to do 1 through 15, which basically covers everything that you do right up to solo. And you also have to demonstrate a lot of the stuff on the check ride. So it's not things that'll be laid to waste. They're actually pretty important things. So we'll talk about this further. We're going to come back to 6187 Delta when we talk about preparing for the check ride as well. This is basic core knowledge that students must have. So let's say, for instance, that you weren't doing a single engine. Let's say you were doing an initial multi-engine. That's no problem. We're just simply going to go down to Echo. So we'll scroll down to Echo. And Echo reads maneuvers and procedures for pre-solo flight training in a multi-engine airplane. And it says a student pilot is receiving flight training in a multi-engine airplane ready must receive and log flight training for the following maneuvers. And notice that this one has a total of 1 through 14. Aha, it's different. So let's go back up here, and you can see that here it has 15 for single engine and it has 14 for the multi-engine. So what is the difference? Well, the difference lies right here in the 14-15. So you can see that multi-engine ends with go-arounds and that single engine ends with go-arounds, but it also right before it has slips to a landing. So if the examiner asks you, the flight instructor, on your check ride, do you have to teach forward slips to a landing for a multi-engine initial applicant, then the best response would be, well, sir, according to 6187 Echo, the answer would be no, because it's not required in the maneuvers and procedures training. So you're only required to do the maneuvers in which are in this area. Okay. Now, the good thing about the next part is that when we actually finish here, Foxtrot all the way down, almost to the very end of this, all the way down to paragraph November, is just all the different categories of airplanes, or craft, excuse me, that we don't care about for this check ride. And that's things like helicopters, which you see here. There's one for helicopter. We have one here for gyroplane and some others, but we don't care about those. But so we're going to skip all the way down to November, because the rest, where November, Oscar, and Papa are going to be the last that we have to deal with in 6187. So with that being said, let's go back up to Charlie. So what we're going to assume is that we've done the pre-solo flight training, and we have done the maneuvers and procedures training in either in a single engine or a multi-engine. And so we go back up to Charlie, and it says that prior to conducting a solo flight, a student pilot must have received and logged and demonstrated satisfactory proficiency. So these are going to be one of the two of the endorsements that you're going to actually give a student. Of course, the first one is that you've actually done the pre-solo test and that you've administered the test, and we'll talk about why you need to give that endorsement here in just a minute. And the second one is going to be that you've actually done everything within the proper maneuvers and procedures training, and we'll use this paragraph C to attest to that, and that will be another endorsement that you give your student. And so after that, we simply just have to scroll all the way down to the bottom here. I'm just going to scroll in pretty fast, but I've got to get all the way down here to November. And let's see if I can get to November. There it is. So November talks about specifically the limitations on student pilots operating aircraft in solo flight, where a student pilot may not operate an aircraft in solo flight unless that student pilot has received an endorsement in that student pilot's logbook for the specific make and model of aircraft to be flown by an authorized instructor who gave the training within 90 days preceding the date of the flight. So November is an endorsement, because you can see right here it actually has, sorry about that. It actually has the word endorsement right there in it. So when you give this training, you have to make sure that you give an endorsement in that student pilot's logbook attesting that you've actually done that, okay? So when you are getting ready to solo someone, you have to have bacon, and that is your Bravo, 6187 Bravo, your 6187 Charlie, and your 6187 November, and that is a minimum. There are some things that you would give outside of that, but that's an absolute bare bones minimum. And unlike the Bravo and unlike the Charlie, the November is only good for 90 days preceding the date of the flight. So you must have flown with this person within the preceding 90 days to allow them to do that. Now, Oscar is a kind of oddity. So if you think about what you have to solo, which is bacon, 6187, oh hell no. That would be limitations on student pilots operating an aircraft in solo flight at night. Wow. I don't know about you, but I would I don't think I would ever solo somebody at night. I mean, I'd have to be pretty bold to do that, and I've been doing this trade for a long time, but I'm telling you, that takes a pretty big set on somebody to be able to solo somebody at night. I just don't think I could do that. So if you're going to give somebody a 6187 Oscar endorsement, which you actually can see here down at the bottom, it says that an endorsement must be given in the student's logbook, then you have to give them flight training at night on the procedures, including takeoffs, approaches, and landings, go-arounds at the airport, and flight training in the vicinity of the airport. And then you must also give them an endorsement, and that endorsement's only good for 90 days. So the Oscar actually goes back and reinforces the Charlie. Okay, so if you have an Oscar endorsement, it's only good for 90 days. The November, only good for 90 days. The Bravo and Charlie, not a specific expiration. Okay, and that's only if you change make and model of airplane, then you would have to give another Charlie. Other than that, you don't have to give another Charlie. Lastly is the Papa, and Papa says as for limitations on flight instructors. So if you give someone a November as a flight instructor and it's been past 90 days, then you will actually go back up and have to recertify them again that they're ready to solo. So what would you need to do? Well, it says no instructor may authorize a student pilot to perform a solo flight unless that instructor has given the student pilot training in the make and model or similar make and model, determine that they're proficient. Okay, determine that they are proficient. And that means that, can you give a PAPA without ever flying with the student? And the answer is no, because how do you know that they're proficient in the maneuvers and procedures if you've never flown with them? So to give a PAPA, you actually have to fly with them. And then it says, determine that the student pilot is proficient in the make and model of aircraft to be flown. So here it is, maneuvers and procedures, and in the make and model. Then it says that you must also endorse the student pilot's logbook for the specific make and model, and that endorsement is good for 90 days. So after you give the Bravo, Charlie, and November, if you give the November and it goes past 90 days, you simply just need to make sure that the person's proficient, and then you can give them a PAPA, and that's good for another 90 days. And you can keep giving them PAPAs every 90 days forever and ever and ever and ever and ever. However, if you have to give them in PAPAs more than 3 or 4 times, you need to talk to your student and figure out where the problem is. In commercial training, when we're trying to, or I say in commercial training, when we're trying to train someone to be a career pilot, we push them through the program pretty quick, so they probably never even see a PAPA. But if a person is just at a mom and pop flight school and they are specifically training just to get their private pilot certificate, my word, I've issued 7 or 8 PAPAs because life gets in the way, and this is a trade that is, or this is a thing that people do in life, which is built off disposable income. So it's not that big a deal. Just if they go past the 90 days of November, make sure they're still proficient in the maneuvers and procedures and in the make and model, and give them a PAPA. No big deal. I would probably go up and fly with them though, that way the FAA won't have any questions about you. And the last thing we'll talk about today is student pilot limitations. So 6189 is basically reinforcing as well the limitations on student pilots, which is November. Limitations on student pilots operating an aircraft in solo flight: may not operate an aircraft in solo flight unless a student pilot has received an endorsement in a specific make and model who gave the training within 90 days. So along with the limitations that we have in accordance with November, which is endorsements must be given, we also have these limitations as well. And there are 8 limitations for a student pilot, and so let's go over them. A student pilot may not act as pilot in command of an aircraft that is carrying a passenger, that is carrying property for compensation or hire, in furtherance of a business, on an international flight, with a flight surface visibility of less than 3 during the day or 5 at night, when the flight cannot be made with visual reference to the surface, or in a manner contrary to any limitation placed in that student pilot's logbook for an authorized instructor. But don't get stupid on this number 8 here. Don't get stupid on that one, like you can't solo unless you're wearing a red shirt or some crap like that. That's basically it. None of this other stuff down here applies to you guys doing that. So that's basically all with 6189. And that's it for today. We are going to come back and talk about this because there are so many different things that we have to understand prior to actually giving these endorsements. We're going to wrap this up today by going back up to the top of 6187, because some of you may be asking yourself, well, Todd, I've seen that in these other ones it actually has the word must have an endorsement. And if you look in Bravo, I told you that you must give an endorsement for the pre-solo knowledge test, and I also told you that you need to give an endorsement for the pre-solo flight training. However, nowhere in Bravo or Charlie, like it did in November, Oscar and Papa, does it say give an endorsement. So how do I know that I have to give an endorsement? Well, I actually have to go to another reg. So I'm going to scroll up to the top and show you where this is located at. So it's located in 6151, which is pilot logbooks. And I'm going to go down Alpha, Bravo, Charlie, Delta, and I'm going to go all the way down to Hotel and India. So hotel is login training time, and India is presentation of required documents. So in the H, it says that you must basically log all the training in the logbook. There's no exceptions to the rule. You have to have that stuff logged in a logbook. You can't solo without putting stuff in a logbook. Even if it's an Excel spreadsheet, I don't care. Something actually has to be done. You have to log the stuff. You don't have an option in it. where India specifically deals with the Bravo and Charlie endorsement. 6187 Bravo, 6187 Charlie. And it says that persons must present their pilot certificate, medical certificate, logbook, or any other record by this part for inspection upon a reasonable request by the FAA, an authorized representative of the NTSB, or any federal, state, or local law enforcement officer. And a student pilot must carry the following items in an aircraft on solo cross-country flights as evidence of the required logbook clearances and endorsements. Logbook, student pilot certificate, any other record required by this section. And so what does that mean? Well, that means that if the FAA wants proof that you've done a pre-written solo, there better be proof in your logbook that you've done a pre-solo written exam. And if the FAA wants clarification or proof that you've done all the training that is required in 6187 Charlie, well, there better be an endorsement in there, because they don't want to have to come looking for anybody to find out if you've done it. So you have to cover your rear end as an instructor, and the student must cover their rear end by actually knowing that this stuff is in their logbook prior to going solo, i.e. they must be in concurrence with 6187 November, because that is the limitations on a student pilot. So hopefully that makes a little bit of sense as to the reason why you don't see a requirement for Bravo and Charlie, but you better have it in there, because if the FAA ramp checks your person and they don't have it in there, well, you're going to be a crap creek without a paddle, for lack of a better way to say that. 6187 is a monster all the way up to this particular point. So hopefully this video will give you a little bit of a push towards understanding it. Be on the lookout for the cross-country one, which is coming up next. It's 6193, and we go all the way through 95 on that one, 93 and 95. So join me again for another exciting YouTube video regarding regulations. Thanks again, Todd with CFI Pro. You guys have a great week.